Oh, good morning, Dodie. Taking the pack out for a walk, I see. You know, those dogs would make a lovely fur coat. What? Oh, you've just given me an idea for a novel, but you're probably not going to like your role in it.
An almost inconceivably huge thank you to my patrons for making what I do possible, especially the big three: April Mack, Shelby Holtz, and beloved Sylphine.
Hello, my beautiful watchers, and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation, the review show about comparing films to the books they're based on. Because I'm shockingly unprofessional, I don't read ahead on my Patreon to-do list very often, so I didn't actually realise I was going to be drawn back into the cult of Disney so soon after reviewing Mary Poppins, but here we are. Dodie Smith was an English novelist and playwright, famous for productions like Autumn Crocus, Call It a Day, and Amateur Means Lover, and such books as I Capture the Castle, It Ends with Revelations, and the subject of today's scrutiny, the 101 Dalmatians. She could also boast of the occasional acting gig on her resume and travelled with a theatre company to entertain troops in France during the First World War. What would eventually become the book known as the 101 Dalmatians started life as The Great Dog Robbery, a serialised publication in Woman's Day magazine. It was re-released as a novel in 1956 and was well received in general, though it was eventually called out for some pretty blatant racism. We'll swing back to that. Smith claimed that the story was inspired by her and her husband owning 9 Dalmatians themselves, and a slightly scary though humorously intended comment by a friend of hers about a possible use for their hides. Lesser known fun fact, Smith wrote a sequel in 1967 called The Starlight Barking, and you know, I'm honestly not sure how to summarize it, my beautiful watchers. I think the technical term for it is batshit insane. It is nuts. It's got magic and dogs with superpowers and space gods and the threat of nuclear war. Both books were included in the copy that I got, and you know, I thought I would just flick through it a little bit, but I ended up going down a rabbit hole that even Alice would request be toned down. It's so weird that I'm actually planning to do a whole separate video where I attempt to describe it and get some thoughts off my chest. It will be exclusive to my Patreon page, so maybe consider signing up for that if you'd like to watch me slowly lose my mind.
Getting back on track, a minuscule 3 months after the 101 Dalmatians publication, Walt Disney procured the film rights for an animated adaptation. However, unlike previous projects, he didn't take much of a personal interest in its development, as he was becoming increasingly focused on live-action movies and the running of his theme park. So, in his stead, a story artist named Bill Peet, who had successfully worked his way up the Disney animator ranks from basically the bottom, was given the task of single-handedly writing the screenplay. The directorship was split between Wolfgang Reitherman, Hamilton Lusk, and Clyde Geronimi. The cast included, though was not limited to, Rod Taylor, Kate Bauer, Ben Wright, Lisa Davis, J. Pat O'Malley, Mimi Gibson, and the show-stealing Betty Lou Gerson, who played the film's iconic villain, Cruella de Vil. The film represents Disney's first proper use of xerography, an animation technique that allowed them to copy an artist's work directly onto cells, cutting down on weeks' worth of hand inking each frame. This would go on to become the company's standard practice until 1990, when the computer animation production system became available. There's a whole page worth of animators who worked on the project, but I would like to make special mention of Mark Davis, who was the sole animator on Cruella, so a large part of making this character so memorable. The film was a resounding success in cinemas, and rumor has it the reason that old Walt didn't shut down the animation department of his company, which he was allegedly very close to doing after the financial loss they suffered on Sleeping Beauty. The Little Mermaid may have kick-started the golden age of Disney animation, but 101 Dalmatians helped keep it alive long enough to reach it. Not for nothing, but I just wanted to mention there doesn't seem to be a consensus on words versus numbers regarding the title. I think I personally prefer the digits, but that might just be me.
Anyways, how much of this success was due to the book, and how much did Walt Disney Productions bring to the table? Let's talk adaptation.
A Dalmatian called Pongo and his wife live in London with their pets, i.e. the married couple who think they own them. Cruella de Vil, an old-school acquaintance of the family, visits and seems obsessed with the puppies that they're expecting. A little later, 15 of the wee things are born, one almost dies but is revived with a tactical massage. Cruella attempts to buy them but is refused. One pup ends up with the name Lucky because of the horseshoe pattern of his spots, and another is called Roly-Poly because it's never too early to start body-shaming your children. Later still, the slightly more grown-up puppies are kidnapped by some thugs in a dark van and taken to the countryside, leaving their canine and Homo sapien parents heartbroken. This presumably happens on a very slow news week because the papers print multiple full-spread articles about this dog napping. In a classic case of the nerve of this bitch, the thefts architect, Ms. de Vil herself, offers the family condolences on their loss, and it's revealed she intends to skin the dogs for their fur coats. With all human-based options exhausted, Pongo and his missus use the Twilight bark to spread an Amber Alert. By barking as loudly as possible, the information is passed from dog to dog across the country until it reaches Suffolk in the ears of a dog that self-identifies as a colonel who has reason to believe the puppies are in a local mansion owned by de Vil and occupied by the unsubtly named Baden brothers. He sends his cat friend to investigate, discovering that there's not just 15 stolen puppies there, but a shit ton of legally purchased Dalmatians as well. When word about their kids gets back to the parents, they start a cross-country journey to rescue them, which is well timed because Cruella arrives to inform her henchmen that there's just too much heat on the Dalmatian farming racket right now, so they need to cull the current herd immediately. Fortunately, the Badens decide to wait until they finish watching their favorite TV program, a game show where people have to guess the crimes of a guest star convict. This provides a useful cover for the pups to escape and reunify with their mother and father. On the journey home, multiple dogs living along the route chip in to help out, providing food and shelter, and they have the bright idea to cover themselves in soot so they're less recognizable. They hitch a ride back to London in a big van and stream into their old house where their humans gleefully take on the rather daunting task of adopting 101 doggies. Well, the obvious first, I guess. The film does away with the apparently superfluous "the" in the title, wisely not ruling out the possibility there might be other packs of Dalmatians roving the British countryside in 100-plus strong groups. The dogs' pets go through some pretty radical changes in the adaptation process. Originally, they went by the names Mr. and Mrs. Dearly. Mr. D was some sort of financial advisor for the government, and so talented at his job, he'd erased the national debt and been exempt from income tax for life as a reward. Dearly becomes Roger Radcliffe in the film, an aspiring songwriter, which I am pretty sure is objectively the exact opposite of an accountant. As the titles imply, Mr. and Mrs. Dearly started the story already married, so the scene where Pongo plays canine Tinder and sets his human up with Anita is a film original. Perdita was originally called Mrs. Pongo, which was fitting because her entire identity was being Pongo's wife in the book. The name Perdita comes from another Dalmatian that was omitted from the film, who I'll talk about later. There's actually quite a lot of weirdly intense sexism in this book. Mrs. is, well, to be perfectly frank, a complete idiot who the menfolk quietly laugh at for being an idiot. I wasn't able to find enough information on Smith to say for certain if this was tongue-in-cheek or genuine internalized misogyny. I think it's the former, but don't quote me on that. The start of the book is a bit rambly in the way that children's stories can be. The first hurdle the Dearly family has to overcome is both Mr. and Mrs. Dearly were still employing their old nannies, so they had 2 on staff and currently no children for them to nanny. The nannies eventually got around this by retraining into other job roles, and as they were conveniently called Mrs. Cook and Mrs. Butler anyway, they went with those. There's some humour derived from Nanny Butler becoming a butler, as that was at the time an exclusively male position. I'm sure the idea of a woman driving a couple around got many a chuckle back in the 1950s. Book Cruella's car, reflecting the woman's pretty appalling taste, was painted black and white striped in the book. The Colonel is a little hard done by in the film. While he might have come off as a little dithery in the book at first, it's quickly revealed that he actually had an extremely keen mind and was the architect behind a good deal of the rescue plan. But, you know, the crazy old man bit is tried and tested, so I can see why Disney ran with that. The cat is demoted from lieutenant to sergeant in the film and is a bit of a suck-up in a way that no cat in the book or real life would be, in my opinion. The film's climax regarding the baddies is a bit more hands-on. Corella and her cronies chase the van of dogs through the countryside and attempt to run it off the road until they crash into each other and end up looking like dang fools. There's never really a direct showdown with DeVille in the novel, but you will be glad to hear she still got her comeuppance at the end. Both versions of the family get a financial windfall at the end of the story and decide to use it to move out to the countryside to live with their 101 Dalmatians. However, in the case of Mr. Dearly, he'd helped the UK government out of another financial crisis and was rewarded with a huge pension. In Mr. Radcliffe's case, he sold a big hit song about Cruella DeVille. Like, he uses her first and last name repeatedly.
Cruella DeVille, Cruella DeVille, if she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will.
Like, I know that after her recent theft she might be a little hesitant to throw a legal stone from her legal glass house, but I'm still shocked a record label was willing to open itself up to a defamation lawsuit like that. Can you imagine a real-life version of this song playing on the radio? Like, it's just someone constantly saying, Elon Musk is a complete piece of shit, he smells really bad and he's got a small penis. Huh, actually that's pretty good.
An aspect of the iconic Ms. DeVille that wasn't carried over from the book was the many implications that she was some sort of demonic being. The book version of her was never warm enough, even wearing furs in summer next to a roaring fire, and she ate everything with about 1.5 pounds of pepper on it. She evidently ate enough of the stuff to have taken on the taste herself, as the unlucky Lucky discovered when he tried to bite her. There was also a legend in the village surrounding her villa that her ancestor was an evil sorcerer who had been driven off by the townfolk while blasting lightning out of his hands. Usually I'd assume that all of this evidence was still only metaphorical, but there's dog space gods in the sequel, so there's legitimately a chance that the original Cruella was descended from a spawn of hell. Several stops the Pongos made on the way to Suffolk didn't make the final cut. It usually involved them needing food or shelter, and a dog from a village along the route going out of their way to help. There was also a surprisingly touching scene with an elderly aristocrat who mistook them for the ghosts of his first dogs and mentioned how happy he was to get this proof that dogs had an afterlife. And a piece of shit child that tempted them towards him using food, then threw a stone at them, injuring Pongo. The dogs were very forgiving about this, but I'm personally convinced a special room in hell was created for him that day. Another side quest that took place before the main plot got started involved trying to find a wet nurse dog to help Mrs. feed her pups, as 15 would be a lot to handle alone. After an unsuccessful time telephoning the local pounds, Mrs. Dearly happened to find a dog collapsed by the side of the road. This was the original Perdita, a liver-spotted Dalmatian, which apparently means that she has brown spots instead of black. When restored to full HP, Perdita told the Pongos about her tragic backstory, which involved a lost love and a mildly neglectful human owner. Said lost love conveniently shows up at the end, making him the titular one in the 101. To mathematically compensate for their absence in the film, they just added 2 more puppies to Corella's death camp. There was a very patient vet who lived near the Dearlys and catered to their many pet needs, exclusively referred to in the novel as the Splendid Vet. Smith managed to incorporate completely deadpan humour into her book regarding him, and I can't help but respect that. My favourite conversation from the book didn't make the cut, alas. While they were in the truck back to London, Pongo was explaining the situation to a Staffordshire Terrier who casually suggested that murdering Cruella would absolutely solve their problem. So, I guess I should talk about that racism I mentioned earlier. It kind of creeps up on you while you're reading it.
Pongo and the puppies ran across the field to escape the evil Cruella, but in a terrible twist of fate, stumbled right into a camp of dirty, filthy gypsies. And as everyone knows, those sneaky, awful, black-eyed gypsies steal honest people's dogs and train them to do tricks, so the smelly, nasty, untrustworthy gypsies closed and locked the gate, barring their escape, and tried to capture the poor Dalmatians.
Yeah, it leans pretty hard into just about every prejudice the British have ever had about the Romani, and then some. Fortunately, it is only in that one chapter, so if you do want to read the book, maybe you could just skip it. A Romani horse comes to their rescue and kicks the gate open. Here's a fun one to lighten the mood. There's a Mr. DeVille in the book. Cruella made him take her name. He's well, it's not described in so many words, but a little twink of a man. It's common knowledge that Cruella only married him because he was a professional furrier, but don't feel bad for him. He's just as shitty as his wife. Just because someone's a bottom doesn't mean they're not an arsehole. The film ends in London, with the move to the countryside only hypothetical, so we don't see the Dalmatians reclaiming what had been their prison when their humans end up buying what used to be the DeVille mansion on the cheap. My personal favourite character from the book was sadly omitted too. Cruella had a rare breed of fluffy white Persian cat. She mentioned she only kept her around because she's a wealth status and reminisces about drowning her kittens. She murdered like 40 kittens. The Dalmatians run into this feline on the way back into London and offer to help her escape her evil mistress, but she says that she's going to stick around until she gets her revenge, and then she fucking does. She helps the Dalmatians infiltrate Cruella's London house so they can utterly destroy her massive fur coat collection, some of which hadn't been fully paid for yet, and all of the pelts that Mr. DeVille needed for his business, thus financially ruining her former owners and forcing them to flee the country. Then she bounced and moved in with the Dearlys. So I think the novel should technically be called The 101 Dalmatians and One Badass Vengeful Kitty. Final thoughts. All in all, I think that the film managed to capture the soul of the book, while simultaneously being a little bit more focused. They did away with a lot of meandering at the start that didn't contribute to the main plot, and they were smart enough to recognize that Smith was really onto something with her villain, so gave her significantly more screen time. Even though they cut out a lot of examples of it, the adaptation still successfully recreates the sense of community that exists between all the dogs in the story and how none of them hesitated to chip in to help out a family in need. And as an added bonus, there's less sexism and racism, so that's a win. I think a fan of the film would enjoy the book for the most part, and the rare creature that's read the book but not seen the film can be recommended it. They're not exactly the same, but they match in all the most important ways. So, what happened next? Well, quite a lot, actually. In 1996, Disney made a live-action reboot of their film starring Glenn Close, Jeff Daniels, Jolie Richardson, Hugh Laurie, Mark Williams, and Joan Plowright, and a bunch of thankfully not CGI dogs. It was not as bad as it could have been in my personal opinion, but it's not very fondly remembered. Still, it did well enough for Disney to greenlight 3 video games based on it and a sequel in the year 2000. In 1997, several of Pongo's pups made a return to screen in 101 Dalmatians the Series, a TV show that ran for 2 seasons. 2003 saw a sequel to the 1962 animated film 101 Dalmatians 2 Patch's London Adventure. Quite uniquely for a direct-to-video Disney sequel, reviews actually lean towards the positive more often than not. In 2019, Disney Channel began airing another TV show, this time a spin-off titled 101 Dalmatian Street, which was set in the same universe as the film but takes place 60 years later. Shockingly, none of these sequels or spin-offs drew in any way from the Starlight barking. Truly a surprising twist. However, despite all of these examples of the considerable spread of the franchise as a whole, the most prevalent legacy of 101 Dalmatians is the character of Cruella de Vil, who gained classic Disney villain status after the success of the film and, as a result, escaped the confines of the franchise altogether. She makes appearances in Mickey's House of Villains, and the 2015 Descendants was ranked 39th on AFI's list of 100 Years 100 Heroes and Villains, and became a meetable character at the Disney parks and resorts. She even got her very own film in 2021, which made some, choices in regards to her backstory. While Bill Peet, Betty Lou Gerson, and Mark Davis made Cruella a legend, the villain we all know and love was enough like her book counterpart for me to say that Dodie Smith created her. All this is one hell of a dynasty to evolve out of an offhand comment about making a nice fur coat from someone's pets, so I think the moral of this particular story is we should all start vocalizing our intrusive thoughts more. You never know what they might inspire. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Don't forget that if you don't like and comment on this video, my channel will die, it will be your fault, and I'll be forced out on the street with a silly little sign saying we'll sass film adaptations for food. If you'd like to learn about an adaptation made around the same time that Walt Disney did give a crap about, consider watching my video about Mary Poppins, or if you'd like to hear about another children's book that was completely overshadowed by its film, perhaps I can pique your interest with How to Train Your Dragon. Either way, I hope to see you next time.